Or we can go in empowered, educated, ready to advocate with a team that's ready to advocate for us and just say, hey, I think we're going to do things a different way. And maybe you're not as comfortable with that. That's okay. I have my doula and my partner to help me. I'm happy to have a conversation with the doctor when I'm in between surges, but this is what we're going to do. There is a way to approach it, any of these topics, but especially with pushing, and that autonomy to move freely is so important to be able to communicate those needs in a way that is not conflict oriented.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. One of the biggest questions that we get, even before class starts, is we're going to talk about pushing, right? Yes, we're going to talk about pushing. In fact, I think we keep expanding our pushing talks because of the questions that we get. And now that we have spent so much time teaching pushing, even though you're going to have a baby no matter what, teaching pushing and advocacy combined with the pushing that we teach, we're probably at 1.5 to 2 hours of total class time just devoted to that. And sometimes it even stretches further than that because we're talking offline with people about it. We're seeing way better results than we did before when they feel like, I don't remember anything about pushing, and this is what happened to me at the hospital, and it was not the best reported outcomes for what was happening. And now, I want to refer you to Lily's birth in the early part of the podcast when she talked about taking control of her pushing and doing it the way she wanted, when she wanted, even though she was encouraged to do something different, and had a very short pushing stage. And does that happen all the time? No. However, I'm watching it anecdotally over and over that when people are in control of their pushing, in that they're going with what their body wants, when they feel like pushing, not going before their baby is descended a little bit and stuff like that, they're having better results and more satisfaction as to what's happening, even if it's taking 2 hours. But it's better than pushing the 4-hour limit, right? So we thought today that we would just cover what we talk about in class, why we do it. And because I think in our early hypnobirthing, the hypnobirthing book says don't push. It says your baby will naturally expel. And sometimes that does happen. But as a doula, and Ashley, you can back me up on this if you have different experiences. On first-time moms, natural explosive reflex where there's been no pushing involved and a baby just slid out. I have seen it maybe 3 or 4 times. I had one mom who was in lotus position on the bed, not talking to anybody, wouldn't let anyone touch her, and she literally rolled over and a baby slid out. One time I've seen that. I used the J breathing with my birth and it worked great for me, but it was taking too long and my midwife was like, stand up. And as soon as I stood up and got in a different position, I had 2 pushes and that baby was out. But a lot of times in different methods, we're taught not to push and your baby will just come out. Sometimes it does, but there's nothing wrong with pushing when your body feels the urge to push, making lots of noise, screaming fuck if you need to, like whatever. There's no harm in following what your body's lead is. And yeah, so that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's something when I first started teaching hypnobirthing that we would get the after class emails being like, this was amazing and this was perfect. And I used the breathing and all this stuff. And then we'd always get the little, but the book says not to push. And I pushed, like I was grunting and growling. I got on all fours and I just felt a primal thing I was moving my baby out of my body. It wasn't happening like to me or out of my control. I was doing it. And so I think I did that part of hypnobirthing wrong. And I think that feedback really changed how we teach it because we realized like, oh, we're actually telling them by saying don't push or saying your body will just do it, that they are not an active participant in it. We're almost disconnecting them from their body and their primal instincts, which is when you feel something moving out of your body, our natural instincts are to participate in that process. And so I would see moms almost like ashamed a little bit to admit that they
Or that
pushed?"
they listen
And
to
I
their
would be like,
nurses encouraging them to push,
"Yeah,
or midwives, "Get in a different position and do this." And then they were like,
yeah."
"Everything with hypnobirthing worked great until."
Yeah, or if it doesn't come, like, perfectly instinctively to them and they ask for coaching, they're almost, like, embarrassed to say, I got a little coaching." And so we really try to walk the line between, yeah, your body will expel your baby. We know that people in comas who've given birth, their bodies will expel their babies, right? That has happened before. And we don't want people yelling in your ear, rah-rahing you if you don't want it. But if you want guidance and you want coaching and you want encouragement from your nurse team or your doula, you want people helping you get in different positions, go for it, right? You get to be as active a participant in your birth process as you want to
Kind
be.
of
And so we really want to normalize that for
like
people.
mother-led. If you want to
Exactly.
do it, and giving yourself permission, and I think that's why we pair it with advocacy, and I we can talk about that in a little bit, but you need to be the guide in your birth process. Yeah, you've never done it before, but you feel it, like your body's doing something. And even with an epidural, where's the pressure? And how are you feeling it? What I have found, that if parents get on the same page with it, so that dad or partner can be an active participant with reminding, because she's tired right at the end, but get on the same page with, we've done our research. We know where there's less tearing. We know what positions to use. We have options in our tool bag. And what, according to your body and your baby's position, is so important, because I can coach you on 20 different ways, but has your water broken? No. So your water's still intact. What's your baby's position? Like, there's so many factors that go into teaching you or guiding you with the right pushing. In the moment is when you need to be making those decisions. And yes, if you want guidance, awesome. But are you coming back to, how are you feeling? What's working for you and what's not?
And we're all about getting back in touch with your body. And in this episode, Kara's going to talk about how we teach that and really what does it feel like to push. I feel like it's very mysterious when you've never had a baby before, that when we talk about following your instincts and getting in touch with your body, a lot of times people will be a little overwhelmed about like, but I don't know what it feels like. Yes, you do. And we'll talk about why. Why you know what it feels like. But I think we want to start out by defining what the pushing phase of labor is in the very traditional language that we use to define the stages of birth. Pushing is considered the second stage of birth, but pushing also can be divided into its own stages. So, the first stage of birth is in hypnobirthing, we call the thinning and opening phase. In the medical language community, that you'll hear effacing and dilating. And that is where your cervix, which is the first door baby comes out of, gets thin and stretchy and opens until it's completely dilated around 10 centimeters. Nobody goes in there with a ruler and measures how open your cervix is. But on average, 10 centimeters, really, where we don't feel cervix anymore and it's just baby's head, the door is completely open. That's the first stage of labor. Today, we're talking about the second stage, pushing, and that's the expulsion phase of labor. So, when that door is completely open, the surges or contractions change from that thinning and opening process to now expelling the baby out of our body. And it changes from what often feels like a menstrual cramp sensation with that thinning and opening to a downward pressure.
So you can kind of, when
And
you're thinking about the breathing, it's an up breathing for the first stage of labor. And then all of a sudden it's a down breathing for that second stage.
yeah, it's real guttural. It's I always go back to the word primal because that's really what it feels like. That feeling, regardless of what it is, when you need to get something out of your body, and it's we talk a lot about the expulsive processes of the body, but it's like when you really need to burp or you really need to sneeze or you really need to go to the bathroom or you really need to pee. The relief of expelling and how good our body is at expelling things out of our body, that holds true for this second stage of labor. Our body will begin to expel this baby and then eventually the placenta because it's time for it to be out. And our body knows
And a
that
little
as part of the labor
and a
process.
little reminder, if you had a heart condition, we're going to allow your body to expel the baby because we don't want to put undue strain on your heart. So if you're pushing a baby out vaginally, your body's going to do that work. If we're trying to protect your heart, that's when they are allowing that natural expulsion and they're having you breathe through it. So it is absolutely 100% possible to do that, right? But when that is guarded in certain methods or books as the only way to do it, you can't say that blanket statement. You just can't
Yeah. It
because
gets really frustrating when it's like, why are some people loud when they sneeze? I don't know. It's just the way that I sneeze, right? Or why do some people have to work harder to go to the bathroom? I don't know. That's just the way my body is designed, right? Not everybody goes through any bodily processes the same way, and pushing is no exception. And yeah, that expulsive reflex, that shift in our body going from that pulling up and thinning and opening to that expulsive change in the muscles of our uterus will expel that baby. That's why when we always go back to referring to people in comas giving birth, it's that expulsive reflex that will expel the baby. Our body knows what it's doing. However, everybody experiences labor differently. Everybody experiences pushing differently. And so if you find yourself when this starts to feel like you're going to be making noise and you want to move around and you feel a ton of pressure, that's you participating in this process. And it's fantastic. That's how you want to birth your baby. Go
I
for
had
it.
a mom refer to it as I became feral, and I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
I love that
Yeah.
word."
And it's funny because all the time as a doula, people ask me, like, do people just scream all the time? And I'm like, no, it's a lot more cattle like, actually. It's or like monster noises. There's a lot of growling. It's not so much screaming as it is just especially during
And you
pushing
do
because it
sometimes hear the primal up scream, which is really super high pitched. And that when you're high pitched, you are tightening, right? So that's when we
yeah.
will start making vocal sounds with her and guide her back to the come back down because that's the force we need, right? In the right place rather than the high pitched tight. And one of the things that we do in class is we show birth after birth, right? We show hospital birth with epidural. We show birth in the woods. We show birth in the jungle. Our classes are very broad when it comes to different types,
Yeah.
like home birth, hospital birth, whatever. But we want to show all different kinds: loud ones, quiet ones, mobile ones, non mobile ones, on your side, standing upright, squatting, because it's so different and it's so what feels right to you and your body at that time. And what we have been See, I get all excited when I start talking about this. Let me just tone my energy down a little bit. What we have been trained on with that black box that's on our walls since we were 2 is women on their backs, in stirrups, knees apart, screaming and curling around their baby. So even in class, when we're just getting ready to start talking about, we're going to talk about pushing today and blah, 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 and I'm going to teach you how to poop. Like it's one of my favorite topics. Um, I say, "What position do you see yourself in with pushing?" And most people are like, "Well, I feel like if I'm using the stirrups, blah, blah, blah." Or if they've done research, I feel like maybe a squat would be better for me, but I know my legs aren't strong enough. Or I don't know, I just know I don't want to be on my back. So that's that primer discussion of like, what are their visuals already going in with this? Now let's talk about what the options are. And that's where we start showing videos that are a little more, let's just say you haven't seen vaginas like that in your life. I tell the partners, like, these aren't the vaginas you were raised on, everyone. Okay.
We're trying to like hit the reset button. I feel like when what I tell families when we start a new series and I talk about the births we're going to show is that we're trying to reprogram how you think about birth. We're trying to hit the reset button on how you visualize birth. And it's like everything in the movies, everything on TV is the legs up in stirrups, the white sheets, the white gowns, the white coats, and then always people screaming at them, "Push, push, I need you to push." And it's so jarring and disturbing and terrifying. That's when people think about giving birth, the reason they find our classes is because of these visuals, these harsh visuals they have of what pushing looks like. And I always joke and say it's like amazing in movies how they demand the drugs and they get the drugs and yet they're still in so much discomfort. Which is it, right? It's just that the media will always want birth to seem emergent and terrible because that's what makes it entertaining. And if birth was just calm and focused or like a little bit like cow sounds, that doesn't make good TV or movies. So that's never how it will be presented in the
And
media.
if you're watching different births on Instagram, especially water births, It's usually mother-led. These babies are sliding out into the water. It's so different that you think it's fake, and I remember my mom watching one of the hypnobirthing videos that I showed her when I was pregnant, and she literally said, "That's not real." And I'm like, "How do you fake a baby slowly exiting a vagina? Like, mom, that's not like I don't know, Steven Spielberg didn't do that. That's an actual human birth." She goes, "That's fake. It doesn't happen like that." And I was like, "Okay, but it came out of her body like that." So that actually did happen. But we're watching videos even on Instagram and TikTok, possibly. I don't know if I've seen lots of birth videos on TikTok now that I think about it.
Some of them,
Maybe,
yeah, they're a little bit more edited
probably. And
on
we're
TikTok,
watching
yeah.
that, but we're thinking, but that's too quiet. I can't do that. And there, you remember what we were comparing it to, on your back, screaming, emergent, right? And they're really
Yep.
surprised when they were pushing for 3, 4 hours, when on TV it's 3 minutes, because one is real and one is not,
Right,
right? But
right.
the length of time you're pushing, the size of your baby, the position of your baby, and if you're upright or on your side,
Whether or not you're medicated also makes a difference, and on the other end of the spectrum, social media also, you have to be a little careful about thinking about the bursts that you're consuming on social media and putting them on a pedestal. Remember that many of them are edited to be silent with music over them, lovely music over them, beautiful edits, but you don't really hear the sounds. You don't really hear a lot of times in these birth videos, it's like lovely music and no noise coming from anybody in the video because they have put music over top and just showed the baby being born. You have no idea. That mom could have been cursing up a storm, making monster noises, sounding like a moose in the woods. You don't know because they edit it and make it seem like it was so quiet and peaceful because it has this lovely classical music over it. So, when it comes to birthing, like we want you to start getting a lot more realistic perspectives on birth, and that's what we really try to do in class is show this broad spectrum, everything from home water birth to, we have one couple giving birth on a porch outside of their house, car births to beautiful, quiet, peaceful ocean birth, right? It's literally all of these different things that we're trying to show you that in all these different positions and all these different ways with all of these different sounds and movements and tools that these families have that babies come out. And I don't want parents to be in that fear surrounding what's presented in the media, but I also don't want them to idealize the things that they see on social media because as much as I love social media's exposure to different types of birthing, just like every other area of life, we can idealize things that we see without any of the context that went into that birth, right? The snippets on Instagram are also not going to show you that this mom pushed for 4 hours before her baby slipped out into the water. They're not going to show you the sounds and the bargaining with her baby and the movement, the hip movements and the spinning babies and
the
all the things.
bargaining with her baby, because that's a thing,
Yeah.
man.
That is a thing. That's in one of our videos that we show in class too. Like this, as cool as it is to see this stuff, I love it. I love the exposure. We always have to remember that what is edited for social media is not the full picture. And that's why when we talk about pushing and as we go through talking about positions and all this stuff, when I talk to my students about making birth plans and how they're going to approach pushing, most of them in the hospital, because that's where most of our families are birthing, is not to marry themselves to anything that is gonna limit them. So, I don't want you to think of, "I'm only gonna birth my baby in this one position," or, "I'm gonna do it quietly," or, I'm gonna make noise." And when you're writing your birth plan, I don't want you putting down on that paper, "I will be birthing my baby on hands and knees." What if you hate it? What I want on your birth plan is, I want freedom to move around all the way through pushing, and then see what feels good to you in the moment, see what feels right to your body, and don't idealize any certain position or sound or like method of birthing and don't hold yourself to any standard other than what feels right to you in the moment and what feels appropriate for you. And that means if you want coaching, have coaching. If you want to move around, if you want to do it quietly, but it's really about getting in touch with your body and what feels right to you during pushing. And that's really how we try to approach it when we teach.
And one of the videos that we show when we're starting to talk about pushing is called Birth in the Squatting Position. It's a 1979 film from Brazil. Ashley, I'm going to let you talk about how we have to cue it up when we're teaching it. But the thing that I love about that video, you guys are going to see a lot of vaginas. So if you have a little weak stomach, I'm just saying, because these are full on birth videos, but it is completely birthing person led, no hands pulling babies out. You will see placentas fall out of the body and the woman stand up and put her robe on and walk away. How were we birthing 700 years ago in our villages, in our tribes, by ourselves, right? How are people still doing that in their villages and in their tribes, right? Western society is a different ballgame when it comes to birthing. We train differently. We have a much more fear-based outlook, etc. I want you to see the rustic way of doing it, the way our ancestors did it, the way your great grandmothers have done it all the way back since the beginning of time, which is the reason you're here because it worked for somebody in your maternal line because you're here. When you can see that, obviously, yes, there's music playing in the background, which is cool. It's a tribal music. And you're watching them do it. You're also seeing that baby come out and them come back into their body. Take that big inhale and exhale. Do the what we call the birth pause. Look down at that baby. Stimulate the baby if they need to. The baby is also taking a breath in, right? They're definitely not medicated, so you're seeing that transition as naturally as possible and them bringing their baby up when they're ready. Watching the placentas come out of your body without traction, without pitocin, without all the things that we do naturally in a hospital, naturally as standard medical care in a hospital, naturally, that's funny. But it's a totally different outlook on, oh my gosh, because you can literally take that visual and go back to Scotland where your ancestors are from. And what did that look like in that little house? Were my ancestors upright? What was she feeling in the moment when she was pushing her baby out? It just gives you a different perspective. And I think that's the one reason that I like to start off that conversation with that before we talk about pooping and the sensations and stuff like that. But we do have to cue it up a little bit differently because it's an older film.
Yeah, we'll have some notes when we put this up for you guys to view it, but it's old. It's from 1979. It's an old British guy describing what's happening. I assume white based on his accent, talking about the practices of indigenous peoples in Brazil. And the language they use leaves a lot to be desired. It's by today's standards racist and disparaging, even though he is admiring the methods that he learned from watching people in these villages in the very rural parts of Brazil have their babies. It's still coded in racism and
How he set up his
prejudice.
studies, right? That's why he
Exactly.
created this study in the hospital setting using those beautiful techniques. He just referred to them as uncivilized peoples and things like
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah, and I always like to preface it when I teach it, when I show this in class, because I don't want that to take them out of paying attention to and admiring what these people are doing, what these families are doing that we're seeing in the video, because their births are spectacular and they're so powerful and they are so in their bodies and having these incredible births that I don't want this old guy with his outdated language and his obvious biases to take away from what these people accomplish. And literally, it was his admiration of these people giving birth in these jungles, in these villages, putting that in place in this hospital in Brazil that allowed these families to have this opportunity to birth this way. And I just always like to make sure people know that's not the part of this video that we endorse or support. And I don't want it to take you away from seeing what these people are capable of doing when they're birthing their babies. And it's just so
I
powerful.
know from the feedback that I've gotten from parents is, wow, you watch that baby's head and then turn and then that shoulder comes out and then they just pop out. I'm like, yeah, because babies can come out like that, but we have not seen it. We have seen providers' hands grabbing around that neck and pulling, giving traction for babies and making sure that shoulder doesn't stick or whatever it is that we are being trained on in medical school, right? We aren't being trained this way. And I know, Ashley, you've seen this, and I'm sure several of you have with the mannequin nurse trainer birth video that the mannequin is on her back and they're letting this plastic baby push out through this plastic mannequin. And the nurse and providers are hands on that baby's head and delivering the baby manually. So if that's what they're practicing and that's their standard, it is uncomfortable when you're like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm on all fours. And I have a woman, and I do have permission because she's a friend now. When we went to this hospital, this is her second baby. She went on to all fours, and the doctor came in. She's like, you're going to have to turn around. And she said, fuck you. The doctors, but I've never delivered a baby like this. And she looked at me and she goes, I've only seen midwives do it. And I go, actually, they come out the same way. And she just
Yeah.
looked at me and then looked at the baby, and I could see her visually, this doctor scanning the vagina and stuff, thinking, okay, where how the orientation is going to be totally different for this baby. I said,
Yep.
just put your hands down there. Like, the
Yep.
baby's gonna come out. She goes, "I've never caught this way." And she got excited about it, but then I could see she was also thinking, liability, what if something goes wrong? And
Yep.
that mom was not moving, and she was not pushing, and she was very calm. And when this doctor tried to instigate, "Do this, do that," she just said, "Shut up." And so she did. And luckily, I got it all on film. But at one point, she started to deliver and pull the baby out. And that's when the mom shrieked, said, stop, like hands off, whatever. And the baby just came right out. But I thought, it, even watching it, you couldn't let the baby just come out. The baby was going to just come out because of training, fear, never done this before, litigation. Like, I get all of that running through her head. But I also feel, if we could just be hands off and get more training and understanding. Do you need to train with midwives that are comfortable doing that? Do you need to see more home birth videos? My gosh, that's all we're watching, right? We don't have any training in that, but I've seen it a million times. Why aren't we expanding our training for that? Because sometimes that's how somebody's going to deliver. And that's where the advocacy comes in, as we're talking about advocacy and speaking up for what you want in the moment, as well as outlining it on your birth plan in general terms. Don't be married to it, obviously. And you can always change your mind. But if you and your partner are on the same page with how you want to feel it in the moment, and that's, well, I'm going to go back to Lily's birth story again. As they're checking her to make sure that cervix is completely open, when she's feeling the urge here and there, but more pressure than the urge to push, she asks, "Where's my baby?" And that baby was high up. And she just goes, "Nope, I'm not pushing." Even though they wanted her to, she goes, "Nope, laboring down. Nope, not doing it." And that bought her enough time to stand up, start walking, maybe go to the bathroom. And then she felt that baby drop. And then she pushed. And we hear stories of that over and over because she's getting in touch with her body and then requesting what she wants, or just doing it. I've also had some moms that have their 40 blink eye mask on and they just say no when they hear the request, and they're in their own world and they're doing what they want to do.
I remember back pretty early on in my doula career, I got a panicked phone call from a mom because she had just gone to her appointment with her doctor where she brought her birth plan to go over with her doctor. And on the birth plan, she had put freedom of movement for pushing. And her doctor had looked at her in her face and goes, it's impossible to deliver a baby in any other position besides on your back, right? It's impossible. And I remember saying to her on the phone, what a boring career that doctor has had. That's the only way she has ever delivered a baby, and that she thinks that is the only way that a baby can be born is with the mom flat on their back. And it although I know that this is how most doctors were trained, it was such a slap in the face of, wow, their worldviews are so small. This medicalized, this hyper medicalized version of birth is all that they know. And we will talk a lot about how we always use caution when we're talking about having doctors do things that they're not trained to do. But pushing is one of those things where, unless something's going wrong, all they have to do is nothing and keep their hands to themselves, which is the hardest thing for them to do. And it doesn't take any kind of special training or special experience to back off. It just takes understanding that your patient has autonomy and capabilities, and that their body is participating in this process, and it doesn't need to be intervened with unless something's going wrong. But so many doctors are just in that mode and that mindset of walk in, do this, do that, pull out the baby, push on the perineum, pull out the placenta, get out as fast as you could. And basically, it's all about speeding it up, getting it out of the room and on to the next patient because they have such high patient loads, because they have such limited time to spend with each patient. There's so many things driving the approaches that these doctors take. The busier the hospital is, the bigger the hospital is, the hospitals that brag about delivering the most babies is where you're going to get a lot more of this type of care that is just wham, bam, thank you out, rather than that patient-centered approach of allowing people to do what feels most comfortable to them.
And when doctors are showing up, and sometimes midwives, right at the very end, for all the reasons you just outlined, nurses are the ones that are doing all the work, right? And they are doing what has worked for them in the past with most people with epidurals, right? And they are coaching, they're guiding. These families have not had education. They have no idea what they're doing. They're trusting the medical providers to do everything. So you have to understand that's what's usually happening in their workday. So if you come with a different idea, you have researched, you know what the studies say, you have an ideal of what you're going for, you're also wanting to be in tune with your body and stand up for that, that's outside the medical norm, which is why you have to be very clear with your voice and your research, because this is you taking on the autonomy for your body in that moment with what you feel, having done the research and the prep beforehand. So that is out of the norm. And while I say it works well, and the regrets that I hear from families who, once I got into that hospital and everything shifted to their mindset instead of my mindset, I knew better and I knew it hurt the way I was doing it, and it would have felt better another way, but I just didn't want to deal with it. Or I was too scared
And
to stand up for it, or I was too scared to have my voice, because we're groomed to not do that, which is why our class is very heavy on advocacy, finding your voice. Our affirmations go over all that kind of stuff. And we have a partner that's willing to step up and advocate for us because we talk about it a lot. I can't say right now to people who have never stood up for themselves and don't even really understand and embody autonomy to say, but in that moment, you need to stand up for yourself. They don't even have practice with that. It's impossible for me to ask that and expect it to happen because we have a lot of trauma with finding our voice. And when I'm saying an active pushing phase is being solid in what feels good to your body in that moment because you've never felt it before, how do you know? But you've got to trust that you're going to know, and you've got to trust that you can find your voice in that moment. That takes a lot of prep and a lot of pre-planning and a lot of getting on the same page with your birth support team, whether that's a doula and a partner or just your partner.
it's important to remember that every single facility is going to have different rules, regulations, things that nurses and providers are operating under. And nurses in particular, I can think of several hospitals in San Diego that all have different policies in regards to what the nurses can and can't do with vaginal exams and support during pushing and all of that stuff. Even moving a patient, right? There are some hospitals where I'll have a mom with an epidural that's, "Hey, I'm uncomfortable. I want to move onto my hands and knees." And they feel like they have to ask the doctor before they move the patient, even though it's what the patient wants to do. So, with all of these things and everything that we talk about in all of our episodes is we're talking about going in, advocating for what you want, putting your foot down for things and having your team help you achieve what you want. But we're not talking about approaching everything with conflict. And that's one thing that really sets us apart too, is not walking into these births thinking I'm here for a fight, because that tension, that conflict is going to impact your birth experience. It's going to create discomfort, physical discomfort in your birth experience. It's going to make it difficult for you to trust and open. And we're not going in looking for a fight. We're always trying to operate with the understanding of what the point of view is of the hospital, the providers and the nurses, what our point of view is, and find a way to approach them in what's going to get us the best possible experience, and make sure that the energy in the room is serving us and allowing us to have the best possible birth experience. Because if we always go into the hospital ready for a fight, we know the system sucks, guys. We're the first ones to say it. But we're also working with human beings within the system. And if we go in ready for a fight and ready for conflict, we will find it. And we can create a tense, angry, fraught birth experience. Or we can go in empowered, educated, ready to advocate with a team that's ready to advocate for us, and just say, "Hey, I think we're gonna do things a different way." And maybe you're not as comfortable with that. That's okay. I have my doula and my partner to help me. I'm happy to have a conversation with the doctor when I'm in between surges, but this is what we're going to do. There is a way to approach it, any of these topics, but especially with pushing and that autonomy and to move freely is so important to be able to communicate those needs in a way that is not conflict
And
oriented.
besides the fact that the research and evidence supports being free to move and changing positions often, right? And team building and incorporating those nurses in those decisions and you guys all getting on the same page makes a huge difference. And we talk about that a lot in our classes of how do we start building that right from the beginning? Dad, how can you keep it not so deep and serious and keep it light, but build that rapport with your team because you might go through 3 different shifts of nurses depending on when you got there. Every single nurse participant becomes part of your birth team. How are we building that rapport? Because, especially if you want extra help, you don't want conflict in that moment. And you are maybe, possibly, probably stepping outside what they're comfortable with or what they've ever seen before. So, if you know that and you're well researched in it and you're considering their point of view, it just makes it easier to communicate what you're doing in the moment. So if we're going back to the way women have birthed in century after century, when we're looking at old pictographs and pictures, they were upright, they were on birth stools, they were moving around, right? When the white people first came to America and they sketched out what the Native Americans were doing for birth, they were squatting, they were holding onto poles, they were holding onto trees. It was upright, right? But in the late 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, as French obstetricians started to become in vogue and they were taking over birth as a medical profession, they liked the
Obstetricians slash barbers. I
yes,
like to also just point out the obstetrician, also barbers.
yes.
They did
So
both.
gross. Yes, with the same
So gross.
instruments, by the way. And that
Ooh.
semi-reclined position became much simpler for them to see what was going on and to do their job, to deliver babies, because obviously we can't do that without a man. So this is where we're stepping away from what we've always done as the men were coming into power, right? And who were the ones that were delivering the babies in the castles, which trickled and percolated down into the lower confines of us people, us peasants down here? It started in the hierarchy of the royal families, right? And everyone likes to blame it on King Louis XIV of he was a pervert and he wanted to watch his mistresses give birth. Yes, that probably happened, but it was actually made more popular by Francois Marceau, who was a very famous French obstetrician of semi-reclined. This is how we're going to do it, and this is how babies are going to come out, right? So as that started to be adopted into our birthing culture, and then we carried it over to America as we came, more patriarchy into our whole medical system. We're moving people out of the farms and the villages and into the hospital system. We're doing scopolamine birth from the beginning 30s to late 20s and 30s. My mom was actually born that way, where we're giving her a hallucinogen to give birth. So she's tied to a bed with soft restraints because she's literally hallucinating while she's in labor. The thought process is she's not going to remember the pain, right? But she also couldn't figure out how to push because she was completely out of it. So we're extracting babies with forceps. We're teaching them how to push because they couldn't do it. And then when the hippie generation comes in and they're gonna do it naturally, how can they push a baby out? We've always done the extraction for them. And then coach pushing starts to be emerge and evolve because we have to teach women how to push, right? So there's a whole history and culture behind how we got to where we are. And I think that's one of the advantages doulas have when they're a doula first and then an educator, because we see birth in so many different ways, whether it's home, hospital, birth center, or the back of a car, if that's happening too, that we understand that birth is a very instinctual, guttural, moment by moment, baby by part by parent kind of situation, that there's a very broad spectrum as to how babies come out and how the mom takes control of that situation as she's in it. Whether she's medicated or not medicated, it's something that really needs to be researched ahead of time to understand here's what my hospital does. This is their history. Here's what I have the idea that I want to do. Where's my birth team and how do I get them on board? So starting to do that research, I want you to start looking up ancient pictures of women giving birth, like hieroglyph pictures. You're going to find a ton of them. Guess what? They're standing up. If they are on their side, if they are laying down, that was mother led. It wasn't a cross cultural, this is how you will do it control thing. And as we've moved into these hospital rooms, it has become more of a control and this is how we're doing it, not to mention the corporate liability, et cetera, that we have placed on our providers. So it's just a bigger deal in the system than not, which is why we want you to really look at past history, what's being done now at your particular provider place, what's done with your provider, because you can ask your provider and their group how they usually do
Look
it.
for hospitals that have influence of midwives because they have much higher rates of exposure to natural birth and quote unquote alternative pushing positions. Midwives will change the whole culture of a facility. And so you are much more likely to get those options and have providers that have that exposure to these birth positions, to unmedicated birth, if they have midwives participating in their facility. So you definitely want to look at what hospitals have birth centers, what hospital, even if you don't want to be in the birth center, even if you want an epidural, hospitals that have birth centers, hospitals that have midwives serve everybody better. So definitely make that part of your research.
One of the best places to start, I want you to always go to Evidence Based Birth. I want you to listen to her podcast. I want you to watch, really research her papers that she has done because she's wonderful at what she does, putting all the studies together. And one of the best places to start is the evidence on birth positions. She's got it segmented out so perfectly on with medication, without medication, side lying, standing upright, all of those things. It's a really good place to see where the evidence holds and how your vision of how you imagine pushing your baby out. That's a great place to start.
Like Care said, what Rebecca does with evidence based birth is she takes all of this information, all of these studies, historical data, and puts it in a way that's really easy to read and easy to consume. And what she really reiterates in the birthing position article is what we know is that birthing on your back in what's called the supine position or lithotomy position makes potentially everything worse and is associated with the worst outcomes when it comes to pushing. The big things people are afraid of with having a baby, tearing, discomfort during pushing, incontinence after, all of these things are worse when people give birth on their back. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see me as I get out my special pelvis that I use to show people in class what different pushing positions look like. Pushing your baby out in terms of our musculature feels like and uses the same muscles in our diaphragm and our pelvic floor as pooping does. And so when we're thinking about positions that are going to be the most effective at moving baby out of our body, we want to think pooping. And we'll definitely get into that more in future episodes. And that's really what we spent a lot of time in class talking about is pooping. Um, but if you just think straight up about the supine position or the lithotomy position, a lot of people think it's just flat on your back, which is more neutral, but it's not. When we put legs up in stirrups, we end up actually tipping the outlet of the pelvis up towards the sky, tipping the tailbone up, which also pulls the tailbone, the sacrum, and the coccyx up and makes the pelvic outlet smaller. And I want you to think about the last time that you effectively pooped laying down. And then imagine pulling your knees back and pushing your butt up towards the sky and trying to poop, and think about how effective that would be. Now think about it being the biggest poop of your life made of bones and trying to poop that uphill. We're essentially asking baby to go uphill and go under the pelvis and go straight up, out and up towards the ceiling.
With a 20 to 30% smaller outlet.
We could do something as simple as simply turning on our sides. And when we turn on our sides, we naturally neutralize our sacrum and our coccyx. And we could even pick up that upper leg, and that pelvic outlet gets so much bigger and makes so much more space for baby to move out of our body. When we flip the pelvis over again and we think about hands and knees and what a natural gravitational position that is. And by the way, two really easy positions to do in the hospital bed where they like you to be, but flipping over onto hands and knees, again, using gravity, neutralizing that sacrum and coccyx and allowing our baby to move out in a downward motion. And then, like we were talking about the birth in the squatting position video, or even if squatting sounds impossible to you, like it does to me, um, sitting on some type of stool or sitting on the edge of the hospital bed so that you're in a fully upright position where we're using gravity, just like sitting on the toilet and allowing gravity to move our baby down and out of our body. A lot of hospital beds are equipped with things called squat bars that go attach up and over the bed, so you can actually pull yourself up into an upright position, even if you have an epidural, and use gravity to birth your baby. And you can see in the pelvis, and when you think about your pelvis, if you're not watching on YouTube, think about your pelvis and what happens when you sit on the toilet. When you go upright and you sit on the toilet to go to the bathroom, you naturally relax everything. All of those muscles in your pelvic floor, when you go upright, it's in our instincts to do that. And so as soon as we move our body into an upright position, it makes everything more open, stretchy, supple, and utilizes gravity to get our baby out of our body. And that's the thing that we always want to be going towards, is the most space for baby and using gravity. And there's so many positions that work so much better than flat on the back, pooping uphill, essentially.
And can you show Ashley flip that over on the back and explain maybe what
Yeah.
non-neutral is? Because when we have pressure on the back of that tailbone coccyx,
Mhm.
it's stuck there. It doesn't move. Neutral means it can
Yeah,
rotate.
it can even be tucked out of the way, exactly. So as soon as you pull your legs up and pull that pelvis back, we pull our tailbone up right into the exit that baby's trying to move through. And like Kara said, it makes that position about 30% smaller because it's tight and it's stuck in an upward position. And when I say neutralize the tailbone, I mean literally as soon as you turn onto your side, you naturally arch your back and move your tailbone back out of the way, and you flex your tailbone back out of the way. You'll often hear people from older times of birthing where when birth first moved into the hospital and even up into the 90s and 2000s talk about tailbone injuries when they're giving birth, and it that happens on your back. That's another negative consequence of giving birth on your back. It's because as soon as you're back on your back, you're putting that tailbone directly in the pathway of that baby's head, and it's going to potentially damage that tailbone versus side lying, arching that back out of the way, going on hands and knees, again, kind of arching that back out of the way and making that nice large outlet for the baby to come out of. And then again, when you're up in that squatting position and when you're in a fully upright squat and you're not reclined back, because again, reclining back, you can tuck that tailbone up. But when you're in an upright position, your tailbone is straight up and down. And so you have that nice open space and you have that tailbone as a non factor, essentially. We want it to be out of baby's way to make as much space as possible and reduce the damage potentially to your body. So when you're thinking about pushing positions, like I said, I don't want you to marry yourself to a particular position. I don't want you to get in your head that I have to do things a certain way because you don't know what your pelvic anatomy looks like. You don't know what position your baby's coming down in. And so, what we want you to do is be moving around, roll onto your side, come up into a squatted position, flip over onto your hands and knees, roll onto your other side. And all of these things are working your pelvis around your baby's head, helping give your baby as much space as possible to do their rotations through the pelvis, and then allow you to have the most effective birthing possible with the least damage to your body.
And let's talk about, and I know this might be the unpopular opinion of the day. If you're upright, there's less chance that you're going to have fingers stuck up your vagina, rubbing deeply into your pelvic floor, into your vagina, doing perineal massage, less likely for an episiotomy, all of those things because you've made it inconvenient for the provider to do hands on things that have been proven to cause more damage to your body. And even incontinence, which the data shows, if you're on your back, you have more chance of leaking and incontinence. And I don't know, were those medicated or unmedicated?
Both. It was about the position. And at the end of the day, the study that specifically looked at incontinence after birth couldn't differentiate between was it the position of being on your back or what was done to you in that position that caused the incontinence. Because
Yep.
unfortunately, when we allow access and we cannot visualize or be fully aware of what is happening, we lose control. over what is happening down there. And it makes us a lot more susceptible and vulnerable to things like excessive hands in the vagina, episiotomies, which is cutting the skin around the vagina, and the pulling out of the baby. Even people will read in their notes that they had a forceps placed in their vagina or forceps placed in their vagina that was never told to them because the doctor just did it while they were down there. And we love to think that hospitals and providers are always going to have our best interest at heart and they're always going to exercise informed consent. And yeah, maybe in a lot of places in California with very strict laws around consent, but in a lot of other parts of the country, consent is not taken as seriously in the medical facility. And there's so many times where we have to consider, if I allow access, am I also allowing other things to potentially happen to me without my consent or awareness? It's the same thing that we talk about in class when we talk about whether or not you should have vaginal exams in the office. Once you allow someone access via vaginal exam, there's nothing stopping them from potentially working things around in there and stretching your cervix and doing other things. And while we want to think that, again, they have our best interest at heart and we hire our doctor and we love them, sometimes limiting access is the best, most protective thing we can do. And especially even if you do trust your provider, if you're in a facility where you don't know what provider is going to be walking through those doors to deliver your baby, sometimes the most protective thing you can do is take control over how much access people have to your body to make sure that you're the most in control that you can be.
And we've all been at births where we are stunned as the witness as to how much pressure and hands and fingers are in the vagina and around the vagina and throwing mineral oil on and really rubbing deeply all over the whole baby's head and the stretching. I mean, it's so excessive sometimes that it's hard to watch and witness. Mom might be numb. She might not know what's actually going on, right? But she's the consequences of what's happening right now, she's going to feel and she's going to have to recover from. But many times there is no consent with that. And unless you're a doula that's really ready to advocate and ask mom, hey, do you want this done? And to have had those conversations prenatally before you even go into the birth room, especially if you know that hospital, that's how they practice. It makes it really hard to witness and also for that parent to recover from because they don't know what just happened to them. And I know we don't like to talk about obstetric violence, but it happens all the time. And you knowing that ahead of time is the only way you can
Yeah,
protect
truly. I
yourself
mean,
from it.
because you can go over things with a provider and you can say, express what you want. But honestly, in the moment when they have full access and you don't have the physical autonomy to be able to stop them, there's very little control in that lithotomy position or that supine position because you have had the use of your legs taken away from you. They're put up in stirrups and you're feeling a ton of pressure. There's a lot going on. And so by taking more control over the positions that you're birthing in, you're taking back a lot more control over more than just the position, but rather how that the rest of your body is treated and how your baby is treated as they make their exit. And yeah, we've all seen some really hard things uh, as witnesses in birth.
And one of the things that I thought was so fabulous with all of these different studies is they found that when women were more upright and in control of how it felt for them, their birth satisfaction was higher. Their incontinence, obviously, because of those studies, we know was less. And they felt more powerful and good about their birth experience. And if we can limit access, but be upright and feel more in control. And one of the things that I want to mention too is if you are medicated and you get to 10 centimeters, did you know that you can cut your epidural completely off at 10 centimeters and just be like, okay, I'm done, and let the feeling come back into your body so that you do have full movement? We have several providers and midwives who do practice this on a regular basis. They have lower cesarean rates. They Parents can get up in a different position, be in a squat, be on their side and have the feeling of where that pressure is. They're pushing differently. And once again, higher satisfaction of feeling more in control. I don't think that's ever talked about because we always in the back of our mind, if we're a medical provider, is what if we have to go back for a C-section? You still have the epidural in your back. They can still dose you if they need to dose you. But having the ability to get up and move around can make a huge difference in, for one, how much a shorter time pushing you could have. and how you feel about the pressure and where that baby is to protect your perineum to slow things down at the end.
So, hopefully, this was a good jumping off point for you to start thinking about what pushing might look like for you in your birth and exploring what different positions feel more natural to you, are going to feel like they are led by you, that your partner and your doula can support you in. And it gives you a good sort of jumping off point for having these discussions with your provider, or if you're newly pregnant or trying to get pregnant, looking for providers that you hear people talk about. I know you'll hear us say till we're blue in the face, read the Yelp reviews, read the Facebook groups, but providers who are known for meeting patients where they are, catching babies in different positions, and really open to being hands off and allowing you to do what feels right to you. The sooner you can start figuring out who those supportive care providers are in your area, the more options you will have. And I think that sometimes we get hung up on what's this provider's C-section rate, and we don't get into the nuances of how the other ways that they provide care. And so when you really start thinking about how you picture meeting your baby, what positions you see yourself birthing in, and the other aspects of birth, it allows you to go in asking those questions and really exploring those options. And that's what we're here to do, is empower you to think about the type of birth that you want to have to make this the most positive, most empowered birth experience for you and your baby. And know that your power is in your body already, that you are capable of connecting with your body and doing what feels right to you in the moment. So, like Kara said, start going back and looking at pictures of people giving birth in different positions. Watch the Instagram videos, watch the YouTube videos of people giving birth in positions other than flat on their back, and really start empowering yourself and picturing meeting your baby in a way that feels right to you.
That's the ideal wrap up, Ash. Thank you. In other episodes, we will talk about tearing and tearing prevention and stuff because that always comes up. Pooping. Yes, that always comes up too. Oh, a lot about poop. And we'll see everybody next week. Bye. Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.